Hi, I'm Natalie Gawkner. This is Both Sides of the Aisle. I represent the political center and have on the political right John Dougal.
Hey, great to be with you today.
And on the political left, Shireen Gorbani.
Hello. Hi, listeners. Thanks for tuning in.
We are in studio and want to talk about some interesting events. And just before we get into the sort of, big issues of the day, it was interesting to see Henry Kissinger pass away in the past week and Sandra Day O'Connor. Shireen.
Some very different people who occupy different political space.
Yeah, and two, what would you call them? Like
Giants.
Senator Hatch was a lion in the Senate. This was a lion of the Supreme Court and a lion in foreign policy.
Yeah, that's right. I'm certain my reaction was probably different than yours to Kissinger, for sure. What were your reactions?
Yeah.
Well, one of the dynamics I look at, what I would say, Sandra Day O'Connor is your classic Western American.
Mm-hmm.
From Arizona, interesting childhood growing up, in Arizona, and then rising to the highest court of the land as the first female justice and stuff. And so an incredible legacy. You look at some of the dynamics of some of the Supreme Court rulings, some that, I side with her on, where her concern with the overreach of government, some that I question, but she was clearly a swing vote on the court when she was there for a significant portion, and so was a major voice on the court.
Mm-hmm.
Kissinger, I look at as kind of this interesting dynamic. Here's a guy that his family fled Nazi Germany, came to the U.S. and rose to such prominence, which shows the power of the American dream and the welcoming society that we have of kind of doesn't matter what your background is. You can make something of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I may have disagreed with some of his approaches and policies, but that's an incredible legacy as well.
I wear an Apple Watch, and I've become accustomed in the last, year of getting the little jiggle on my wrist, and I look down, and another famous person has passed.
Yeah,
it seems more and more common as the baby boomers age, and you're seeing these things. But
I would love to hear your thoughts on Sandra Day O'Connor.
I'm a little too young to remember a lot of their most important things. The Sandra Day O'Connor memory I have is that Mike Leavitt wanted her to swear him in as Health and Human Services Secretary. So they had a friendship.
Yeah.
So I admired that. I loved when I would go down to Arizona State University. The law school's named after her, or the building is, so that meant something to me.
Yeah.
All I remember about Kissinger is the Nixon goes to China events. And
that's where I thought you were going to go with your Apple Watch because of him and China. Hey, my Apple Watch was
maybe something, like that. But it'll be a long time before we have someone in foreign policy as dominant as he was in his day.
Yeah, I think that's right. So one of the things that's been standing out to me in the coverage of Sandra Day O'Connor's passing is the amount of really the challenge that she had getting into working as a lawyer at all. And then what happened,
she could only clerk.
A sea change that happened when she was on the Supreme Court and talked about just seeing across the entire country a huge shift in women in law. And I think that is a legacy that I'm grateful for. I think that's important. Henry Kissinger is a war criminal as far as I'm concerned and really is responsible for a huge number of deaths across certainly Asia. And it feels like a really complicated person in our history and somebody who had huge influence across parties.
Yeah. One other comment I just make going back to Sandra Day O'Connor, but one of her clerks, Renelle Jones, was my Sunday school teacher when I lived in Washington, the Capitol Hill branch, if that means anything to listeners. She was an amazing teacher, really changed my life in some ways, and she's now in the faculty at the law school at the University of Utah. So pretty cool. A free speech expert. Well, we got other interesting, national news. George Santos is expelled from the House. All of the
all
of the Utah delegation voted to expel him, if I'm using the term right. John, let's go to you as a Republican. Would you have expelled this guy?
Yeah. Okay. I get there's certain concerns about procedure and policy, and it's really rare to expel somebody from the House. But given how egregious his violations were, given how he was clearly using his campaign, his office for his personal benefit, I don't see how you could have let him stay.
Yeah,
and
23 count federal indictment, including fraud.
Yes, but not just the indictments. The House investigation was damning in and of itself, and I think that's sufficient for the House to say, okay, a change is necessary. Now, it took 3 votes to get there, spot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would say the question I would have for the Utah delegation is, I'm proud of the vote that they took. I think we could look to Donald Trump and say, is this a person who is also unfit to serve, given the level of criminal indictments that he has, which I think is over 90 at this point. So it would be curious to see if the logic would translate there. But I'm grateful they did this. I think he was certainly a problem. I believe it was our Senator Mitt Romney who said, your behavior is beneath this office, right? And called him out. And I think that that's important. And there are moments where I think our Congress could not be more of a dumpster fire. Seeing this happen makes me think that there is some opportunity for normalization.
Well, and I don't know if you saw the comments of John Fetterman, Senator Fetterman from Pennsylvania, calling out Senator Menendez and saying, okay, good on the House for getting rid of George Santos, but Bob Menendez is even worse.
Yeah.
And he's still here.
Yeah.
This is the senator that wore the hoodie on the House floor and shorts, and they changed their rules because of him.
Right, but he's calling out, you know, Menendez, not as the senator from New Jersey, but the senator from Egypt.
Well, honestly, I think Menendez should step down as well.
Interesting. Hey, another one I want to go to is this term dumpster fire, Shireen. You just used it. I mean, it used to be like really a big deal to say that about Washington. Now it's just like commonplace. And then
there's another one.
Yeah, and then on Fox News, we got to see last week the debate between
What kind of carbon offsets are there for those dumpster fires?
That's a good question.
for Florida governor and the California governor. It was
DeSantis and Newsom head
to head. And this is just a spectacle. This is just, political sport.
Yeah.
Why on earth did DeSantis agree to do this?
Okay. Yeah. Why do you think?
What, John?
It's to showcase conservative Florida principles versus progressive California principles. And it was to highlight that. And folks were pushing this debate about a year ago. So I would say it should have happened. It should have happened long ago to really showcase the differences between those two states. They're some of our biggest states, and they kind of represent the two different parties, and to showcase that.
The coasts going after each other.
But you have an interesting dynamic. You have Newsom, which I think is an extrovert, and he's really good on the stage and speaking and things like that. And you have DeSantis, who's more an introvert from my perspective, probably more comfortable governing than he is being out on the stump speech out there debating.
Which means, why did he do this? Because Governor Newsom is, the other word you'll hear, is so slick. Yeah. He is so good on front of a camera, on his feet, relaying facts. And I know to the Fox audience that just maybe is offensive, but to the moderates that watch this, boy, you didn't come away wanting DeSantis to thrive, because he just looked so unpresidential to me.
I have to say, I watched only clips, highlights, but that resonates with me. If you even just looked at it, I used to many years ago be a communications teacher. And when you think about nonverbal communication and really what an impact that has had in politics over the years, I think the Nixon debate is kind of the classic one where they talk about people who listened versus watched and the different experiences that they had. But when you think about just how smug, uncomfortable DeSantis looked compared to Newsom, who really did look quite confident, quite presidential, honestly, and had a very, you talked about his facts, and I agree with that. I think he really tried to keep coming back to the facts, but he also made values-based arguments. And those arguments where the one that really stood out to me was, I don't like the way that you demean and belittle people. I don't like the way that you treat people. And I think that is not something that DeSantis needs.
There was some value stuff there. I agree.
Yeah, in the broader dialogue.
But I think DeSantis was pretty strong when he came back going after San Francisco. You were the mayor of San Francisco. You look at the dumpster fire that San Francisco is today, and the crime that's there, and you've tried to take those policies and expand them out statewide in California.
John and Shireen, I really felt for the listeners, because they're throwing out facts left and right, and you don't know if any of them are true. I found myself afterwards wanting to go look up legitimate
Natalie's
sources.
Fact check.
Yeah.
But when DeSantis brings out the San Francisco poop map, do you guys see this clip?
Yeah. Yep.
I didn't
John?
see this clip.
He holds up an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper that's a map of San Francisco, and it is a live
It's where people can
depiction,
report, where they
when
see
they see
feces.
human feces, and it's just this big brown blob of one of our great American cities, and
Or formerly great.
yeah, and of course, if I have this right, Governor Newsom used to be mayor of San Francisco,
Yeah.
so there was that kind of drama happening. Yeah. We've got just 45 seconds or so left in this segment, but I wanted to ask Shireen about our Vice President Harris going to the COP28 and talking climate.
Yeah, so she made some pretty bold commitments around climate. Unfortunately, many of those require congressional approval. So when we're thinking about the dollars that are actually going into, for example, the funds to offset some of the climate disasters that we're seeing around the world, especially for the poorest countries, that's going to take collective action from Congress. But I do think that it's a nod to, frankly, a very organized and vocal younger segment of the voting population here who wants to see more on climate from this administration.
John, I'll make one prediction for you here. As Salt Lake City and Utah becomes more, closer and closer to Olympic Day, and as we prepare to host the world, that a changing climate and sustainability will crescendo in importance to this community. That's a prediction I'm making. What do you think?
I think when it comes to the question, how much snow are we going to have? If we see challenges having snow, you're absolutely right. If the snowfall doesn't change, then I don't think.
Is that right? Well, even in the 30 seconds we have left, I would just say that we have to pay more attention because the international community will not support us if we don't show care for the planet long term. Not even just snow for our Olympics, but basically in a Winter Games orientation, you've got to care about climate.
Yeah.
Hey, in our next segment, this is Natalie Gochner with John Dougal and Shireen Gorbani. We've got lots of local news to share. Stay tuned.
Shireen Gorbani on the left.
John Dougal on the right.
Natalie Gochner in the political center. This is both sides of the aisle. John and Shireen, I want to just start out with the Olympics because they made the announcement, the IOC. I was at...
what was the announcement? What did it say?
I was at the City and County building, which I think we should just call City Hall, as this announcement happened. It was just marvelous because with just like 48 hours notice, all these incredible leaders in our state made time to be there.
Yeah.
Ryan Smith is there. Gail Miller's there. Mayor Wilson's there. Of course, Mayor Mendenhall, the governor's there. Legislators, business community, a lot of volunteers from the games. It's just really cool. And then they just had the live feed from the IOC essentially saying that Salt Lake City, Utah is the only person in dialogue with the IOC for 2034.
So you've been through this before, have a little bit of insight. So does this mean we are getting the Olympics?
So they changed the process, okay? And so it's different, but it means
You're
that
saying there's a chance.
It means that if
really
we hit all our marks, it's us.
Yeah.
And, we don't want to be arrogant about it, but we've already got our budget done and, we've got our facilities. We can hit those marks.
Yeah.
So it's targeted dialogue. The formal final announcement will come in July, but it's us.
Yeah.
It's ours.
I have so many mixed feelings about this. I think I've disclosed before that I'm not the biggest fan of the Olympics. I
do not understand this.
No, I will say that it is.
It's because it's not gymnastics.
It's because it often displaces huge amounts of people and often huge amounts of resources go into facilities that often are laid to waste. They just aren't reused. I think that's one of the things that's actually really exciting about Utah is that the ongoing investment that's kept up many of these facilities, to me, means less of that. But I do think that we need to be really concerned about what this is going to mean for our affordability of housing, all these kinds of issues. The growth that came certainly after the last Olympics is going to, I think, be exacerbated by this Olympics. So I think there are really serious challenges. I hope that our leaders, and I think we have some news today that suggests there is, momentum on some of these really big issues when we think about things like affordability of housing, homelessness that are all tied into this for me. But I'm grateful that we kept up our facilities and that we don't have to kind of start from scratch.
So that's Shireen's call for Provo to be the headquarters of the Olympic Games in 2034.
Certainly not.
Shireen, I follow what you're saying. It's not my lived experience.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think of the games like this. When we bid for the '02 games, just imagine this. We passed a sales tax increase to build our facilities before we even had a commitment from the IOC to host the games. Talk about risk.
Yeah.
But we made a decision as a state to become a winter sports capital.
Yep.
That was good for our state. And that the Olympics could be a big piece, but it was bigger than the Olympics, what we were trying to do. And in the end, this is one of the huge community and public policy success stories of our nation because you have a state that made a commitment, that delivered on it, meaning built these facilities, that landed the games, that did it successfully, that reaped a profit, that put that profit in the bank, used that to keep the facilities world class.
Yes.
Before we host the next one,
Yeah.
making us the most sustainable site. We're obviously a very compact site. But
Talking like a staffer for the governor at the time they happened.
but what I would say, when I say lived experience, this is a huge international success story right here in Salt Lake City.
I agree.
And it has brought wealth and income and prosperity to the state.
I agree, but I think about sites like Sochi, right? Like these kind of
Sure.
different things, and certainly some of the things that we're hearing about, even with like the World Cup comes to mind, right? And really a lot of the fraud and corruption that goes along with it. So I know that we had a little bit of our own corruption scandal the first time, but I think generally Utah did this well and does it better than a lot of other places, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah. John, let's just get your voice on this. I mean, do you have these fears about it turning on us, bringing too many people here, or that the international spotlight will be too bright and we won't live up to the moment? What?
Well, I mean, one of the fears is always the dynamic, which is the sequel is almost never as good as the original. And we had such magical moments coming out of the 2002 Olympics. One of the other dynamics is sometimes they get overplayed. I mean, I can remember at the time I went into a restaurant, Diamond Lil's there in Salt Lake, and it was, what was it? I think it was the Friday before the games were starting. They were so excited about all the events and all the business they were going to do. And I was there the Friday after the game started, and the restaurant was basically shut down. They had a little buffet line going. And I'm like, so what's going on? And they're like, nobody's coming out of here. The Olympic visitors are not coming here, and none of the locals are coming here. And so they basically were thinking dollar signs driving to their business, and now they're out of business.
Make the mistake of focusing on the 16-day event. If you include the Paralympics longer.
They were kind of pitched to buy into that narrative.
The focus is really more. What makes the Olympics special is it gives us a moment of international spotlight that we have to prepare for, and it makes us better in every way. Meaning our transportation system has to work. It'll help us with our air quality. I mean, the spotlight is so bright that you change your behavior to be better.
Right.
And it's a long game. It's not a day, multi-week event.
And you come out, clearly we've showcased that, we can host good events and people love the beauty of our state, and there's lots of tourism and lots of people moving here for various reasons. That part of that came out of the Olympic Games, but there's also the downside that Shireen talked about. We're having housing prices going up rapidly.
Yeah.
We've got certain constraints where supply is not meeting demand, and other ramifications that come with it.
A stat that listeners will find interesting is we have about 1 million more people here today than we did in 2002. That means about 1 in 3 Utahns didn't experience the games.
That's me.
Yeah. Interesting. Hey, another thing when you talk about the Olympics, you always think about Mitt Romney. And Mitt Romney's been making news because he's basically made this comment that he'd vote for a Democrat over Trump in 2024. And now he's been kind of walking that back. But
I think he said, why isn't Ann running for president?
Does this mean Ann is a Democrat?
That happens. Yeah, that happens.
I think he's saying Ann's a better choice than what's out there.
But he is on a warpath against Donald Trump. Yes.
Yeah.
And his own party, largely.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
No. I think clearly there's no love lost between the two of them. They have a long, troubled history over the years, from when Romney was a presidential candidate to when Trump was a presidential candidate to when Trump was president, and all that stuff, and to the impeachment and everything else. There's a long, troubled history there. And I don't fault Romney for his concerns about President Trump and stuff. But clearly, I think he got a little over his skis in terms of his statement, and people read maybe too much into it, more than he intended.
Yeah. If our listeners really get excited about all this political news just as a hobby or something, I recommend a subscription to Sirius XM radio during a presidential election year. Because there's a whole station on presidential politics that always is having interesting games.
For holiday music.
There is, there is that, and then of course you can get the live feeds, happening on the BBC, or all the financial news and how they're commenting on the presidential. And there's this trick in news gathering that the financial news sources are the best because they have a bottom line, and so they're not in it for entertainment as much as they are for giving great information.
Yeah.
So CNBC and the like, Bloomberg, I recommend those. So, all right, let's come.
We're not sponsored by Sirius XM, but if you'd like to talk, give us a call.
Yeah, give us a call.
Let's talk about Utah governor's race quickly. We had Representative Brian King announce he'll challenge Governor Cox this year. This is the Democratic candidate. This is another one of these
former minority leader in the House.
Yes.
Another one of these Apple Watch moments where I get this text from Brian King. I'm like, what does he need? I'm like, it's a massive text.
Just a fundraising.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shireen,
I got the text. Did you get the text?
I got the text
Did you? Okay, good.
Yeah.
Give us the color commentary.
Okay, so
from
this
an
is
unknown number, so I knew it wasn't really Brian.
Yeah, so I'll just say Brian King was a person when I, got involved that certainly was a really kind and generous person with his time, advice, certainly support. And I think a person who is really, I mentioned a couple weeks ago, I would love to see somebody who is an urban candidate, and he is, lives in Salt Lake City.
Sugar House area.
Yeah, in the Sugar House area.
Attorney by training.
Really just a thoughtful kind of LDS, right? I think I don't know if he's practicing now, but I learned a lot about the faith and
Oh, he's got, for listeners who'll find this interesting that are of the faith, he's got a lineage that stretches back to Joseph Smith, and he looks like the death mask.
Oh.
Do you know this, John?
I did not know that.
He looks like Hiram. I know that's sort of funny, but I've talked to him about it.
Oh, well, it's,
He has the curly hair, and he's got the forehead and nose of the Smith family.
So what I would say, though, is that for a person who really centers and prioritizes some of the key issues and also values that I see a lot of Utahns care about, I'm really proud that he's in this race, and I'm excited to see how it goes.
Yeah.
So I have a fun relationship with Brian. He and I would butt heads, clearly, given where I represented Northeast Utah County.
And
very
you're both
conservative.
very
He was-
data-driven and both very policy smart. So I can imagine
So
the
we had a
headbutting was
great
interesting.
friendship, but we disagreed significantly on policy. And I viewed him as doing a good job representing his constituency, and I was doing a good job representing mine. But I can still remember one time, it was in the summer, interim time, it's quiet. I got a letter from Brian out of the blue, and I opened it, and it was a photocopy of a political cartoon, house on fire, firefighters racing up to put out the fire, and the homeowner stands waving his hand saying, no thanks, I'm libertarian.
Oh, funny.
And he just had a little note that said, saw this and thought of you. And
Yeah.
sent it off.
Tells you something
and it
about
says
him.
something that, you had to get my address and get a stamp and put it in an envelope and send it on its way. But I still remember
against someone
that.
he disagrees with. John, stay with you real quickly here. Is this good news or bad news for Cox? And the way I want to say that is, of course, he's the incumbent. He's a Republican. He's, wildly favored. But this is a high-quality policy mind.
Yeah, but he's on the Democratic side. And so I think at the end of the day, I don't see this as being much of a challenge for the governor.
Shireen, I don't think the governor will be able to discount him.
No, I think that's right. I especially think kind of in light of some of the broader conversations that we're having and also, some challengers that Cox is facing from within his own party, there could be a little bit of a political bloodbath for him coming into next year's, I guess it's next year's already. It feels weird to say that, but election. So I think he could.
Sign-ups are a month away.
Yeah, we'll see how things go. But I think with Phil Lyman in the race, it could be challenging in the primary. And then coming out of that, there might be some space for people who are interested in maybe moving towards a more kind of moderate view for maybe what the future of our state
And
should
Cox
look
has
like.
been trying to take steps to the
To the right.
To the right. I don't think, it's going to be significant enough to matter and stuff like that. But
Yeah. Big year for both sides of the aisle with all this political talk.
That's right.
Early December is always when the governor releases parts of his budget, his recommendations to the legislature. He went out this week with a big ask for homelessness.
Yes.
And
$180 million ask
yeah.
in a time of flat to declining revenue.
Yeah. And I have this news for my policy friends up on Capitol Hill. You can pay a lot now or a lot more later.
Yeah.
Look at this proposal seriously. This is a coming together of the Salt Lake County mayor, Salt Lake City mayor, the leadership of Wayne Niederhauser as our homeless coordinator in the state. This is a big move, very becoming of our state.
And I think this ties back to the conversation around the Olympics, right? If we're really thinking about what it means to invest upfront and really make significant inroads when it comes to deeply affordable housing and the support system that our growing state needs, especially when it comes to the issue of homelessness, this is good. I'm grateful to see this kind of investment. What we've seen year after year is that there is a big number like this that comes out. Usually a lot less gets actually allocated by the time the budget season is done. But I couldn't agree with you more, Natalie, when we say the investments that you make in this issue up front pay dividends down the road.
Yeah.
It is much more expensive to do it the way that we're doing it and to see more and more people on our streets.
And I'm much more skeptical. I mean, the Legislative Auditor General over the years has done various audits about overseeing the programs of homelessness in the state, expressed various concerns about that oversight. From my perspective, it just seems like year after year, we'll put this money in and it will solve these problems. It'll put this in and it just seems to be more of the same. Throw more money in, nothing really changes.
Yeah. John, you are
So I get the good intent.
you are
but at the end
overly
of the
skeptical
day,
here.
Yeah.
You are overly skeptical. Here's why.
I was content. I'm a realist. You look at the last 5 years,
This is why,
when
though.
a population grows, the same amount of resources no longer meets the demand.
This is why you're overly skeptical, because the key to this issue is alignment. That's how you make sure that you get results. That's how you make sure you get, wise spending of the money. And the Utah Impact Partnership is the philanthropic arm of this, and they are demanding accountability. And so you're going to see a homelessness dashboard. You're going to see independent reviews.
Temporary shelters means people are still technically homeless from my perspective.
For sure.
They don't have a home. And so we are, in essence, incentivizing to keep people homeless. We are incentivizing the organizations out there to keep people dependent and homeless. That is part of the outcome of what we're driving. Let's recognize.
There have to be a lot of different entry points, though. People are not ready necessarily to move straight off the street into some sort of housing or a shelter for lots of reasons, including deep trauma. So I think that it's important for us to have lots of different entry points, and that I don't love the temporary shelters either, but I think that it is a path.
That's a wrap. We got to go. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Both Sides of the Aisle, produced by Anthony Scoma. Thanks for listening.